At 0200 hours local time, submerged deep in the unforgiving, freezing black waters of the Sea of Japan, the USS Texas was hunting ghosts. The Texas, a 7,800-ton Virginia-class nuclear fast attack submarine, was gliding silently at a depth of 400 feet, gathering highly classified acoustic telemetry on a North Korean coastal missile facility. Inside the control room, the lighting was rigged for dark red, casting long, sharp shadows across the faces of the sonar operators. No one spoke above a hushed whisper. The crew wore soft-soled shoes to prevent even the microscopic squeak of rubber on metal from transmitting through the hull. They were a multi-billion-dollar apex predator, wrapped in sound-absorbing anechoic tiles, operating in total stealth. Then, without warning, the entire ocean seemed to violently tear open. The sonar room went dead silent as a deafening, high-frequency active sonar ping slammed directly against the American submarine's hull. It was a physical strike, a vibration that every man on board felt rattle through his teeth. In that fraction of a second, the American captain knew two things. First, an enemy vessel had somehow slipped inside their acoustic perimeter. And second, North Korea had just challenged a US nuclear submarine, and they were about to realize it was a big mistake. The unmistakable, terrifying metallic rush of seawater flooding into an enemy's forward torpedo tubes echoed through the water, confirming that the hunter had just become the hunted. To fully comprehend the sheer terror of this moment, and to understand exactly how a rusted, impoverished, technologically starving Navy managed to sneak up on a $2.7 billion marvel of American engineering, you have to fundamentally understand the brutal, unforgiving physics of underwater warfare. The ocean is not a clean, uniform bathtub of clear salt water. It is a chaotic, unpredictable, violently layered cake of temperature, salinity, and extreme pressure variations. These variations create what submariners call thermoclines and haloclines. When sound travels through the deep water and hits a strong thermocline layer, a sudden, sharp drop in water temperature, it doesn't just pass straight through like light through a window. It bends. It refracts. Or, in many cases, it bounces off the layer completely, much like a flashlight beam hitting a mirror at a sharp angle. A submarine hiding below a strong thermocline is essentially invisible to a submarine listening from above it. The sound waves of their engines simply bounce off that thermal ceiling and scatter into the endless abyss, leaving the water above completely, terrifyingly silent. The ocean is full of these acoustic blind spots, immense shadow zones where a multi-billion-dollar, hyper-advanced sonar system is rendered completely blind by a simple difference in water temperature. The North Korean captain, commanding an obsolete, dangerously aging Romeo-class diesel-electric submarine, knew this specific patch of the Sea of Japan better than anyone alive. He knew exactly where the thermal layers sat during this time of year, and he used them as an impenetrable acoustic shield to creep within 4,000 yards of the USS Texas. But it wasn't just the cold water that hid him. It was the fundamental, somewhat paradoxical nature of his boat. American nuclear submarines like the Texas are the undisputed, unchallenged apex predators of the deep ocean, capable of staying submerged for months on end, but they have one unavoidable physical flaw. Their nuclear reactors require massive, incredibly powerful coolant pumps to keep the radioactive core from going into a catastrophic meltdown. Those pumps are mounted on hyper-sophisticated sound-dampening rafts, physically isolated from the outer hull and wrapped in cutting-edge, sound-absorbing materials. But they are always running. You cannot simply turn off a nuclear reactor in the middle of a combat patrol. Therefore, there is always a faint, continuous, unavoidable mechanical hum radiating from the American submarine into the surrounding water. A diesel-electric submarine, on the other hand, operates on a completely different set of technological rules. When a Romeo-class boat submerges, it is forced to shut off its incredibly noisy diesel engines because those engines require oxygen to combust. Instead, the submarine switches entirely to massive, heavy banks of primitive lead-acid batteries. Running purely on electric motors, with no nuclear coolant pumps chugging away in the background, a diesel boat can become a literal hole in the water. For a few tense, claustrophobic hours before the batteries die, and the crew begins to suffocate from a lack of oxygen, A cheap, rusty diesel submarine is actually significantly quieter than the most advanced nuclear submarine on planet Earth. The North Korean captain had essentially shut off his boat's mechanical heartbeat. He was drifting dead on the deep ocean currents, hiding under a thick thermal blanket, waiting in complete, breathless silence for the American giant to pass by his patrol sector. When he finally spotted the faint, almost imperceptible acoustic shadow of the USS Texas moving through the dark, he made a tactical decision that bordered on suicidal arrogance. Instead of remaining hidden, instead of letting the lethal American vessel pass into the night, he ordered his sonar operator to go active. In the high-stakes, lethal game of submarine warfare, there are two distinct ways to use sonar, and the difference between them is the difference between life and death. Passive sonar is just listening. You wear the headset, you watch the cascading green lines of the waterfall screens, and you wait patiently for the enemy to make a fatal mistake. A dropped wrench on the deck plates, a cavitation bubble from a propeller spinning just a fraction too fast, the rhythmic metallic hum of a poorly maintained water pump. It is the stealthy, preferred way to hunt. It is how you kill without ever being seen. Active sonar is entirely different. Going active is like walking into a pitch-black warehouse where you know a heavily armed, highly trained killer is hiding, and suddenly turning on a million-candle power spotlight. Yes, the intense beam of light will instantly illuminate the warehouse and reveal exactly where the killer is standing. But it also instantly tells the killer, and every other, hostile force within a 50-mile radius, exactly where you are standing. By sending a massive, high-powered pulse of acoustic energy directly at the American submarine, the North Korean captain was effectively screaming his exact coordinates into the void. He wasn't hunting anymore. He was posturing. He was trying to prove a point, trying to force the United States Navy out of what the regime in Pyongyang considered its exclusive, sovereign territorial waters. The distinct, terrifying metallic clatter of seawater flooding into the Romeo's forward torpedo tubes followed the ping just a few seconds later. He was locking a firing solution. He was directly threatening to shoot. In the control room of the USS Texas, there was absolutely no panic. Panic gets you killed when you are sealed inside a metal tube 400 feet below sea level, with the crushing weight of the ocean pressing in on all sides. The air conditioning hummed softly, the consoles glowed with cold green and blue light, and the crew moved with terrifying robotic calm. The captain of the Texas didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He simply looked at the waterfall display on the sonar console, watching the bright green spike of the North Korean active ping, cascading down the screen like a digital lightning bolt. The American commander knew exactly what he was up against, and he deeply understood the profound absurdity of the situation. He was sitting inside a pressurized vessel of hyper-advanced stealth technology that cost more than the entire gross domestic product of several small nations. His boat was packed with highly trained specialists with years of schooling and loaded with weaponry that could end entire cities. He was being threatened by a vessel designed in the 1950s by Soviet engineers, built with inferior steel, operated by a crew that probably hadn't eaten a full, nutritious meal in weeks. The financial and technological asymmetry alone was mind-boggling. The Romeo class was a Cold War relic, a noisy, cramped iron coffin prone to catastrophic mechanical failure, smelling constantly of diesel fumes, battery acid, and unwashed bodies. The Texas was a silent, lethal, clinically clean ghost, but at 4,000 yards, the physics of high explosives simply do not care about your defense budget. At 4,000 yards, a torpedo is a torpedo. If that North Korean captain panicked, or if he was acting on direct orders from a fanatic command structure in Pyongyang, and actually fired a heavyweight, wire-guided torpedo, the threat to the lives of the American crew was intensely, horribly real. The Texas would have to evade, deploying noisemakers, dropping countermeasure decoys, and driving the nuclear reactor to maximum power to outrun a weapon that doesn't feel fear and doesn't get tired. But the American captain didn't order a counterfire. Launching a Mark 48 advanced capability torpedo would undoubtedly solve his immediate problem. The heavyweight American weapon, traveling at over 50 knots, would track the North Korean sub and turn it into a cloud of expanding scrap metal, and red mist before its crew even had time to realize they were dead. But sinking a sovereign nation's submarine, even one that was acting aggressively in international waters, would instantly trigger an international incident that could easily spark a massive, catastrophic regional war. It would give the North Korean regime the exact blood-soaked propaganda victory they desperately craved. The captain needed a solution that would completely eliminate the threat without firing a single shot. He needed a maneuver that would humiliate the adversary so completely, so totally, that they would never dare challenge an American boat again. He looked at his weapons officer and ordered the immediate deployment of an acoustic device countermeasure. The ADC is a brilliant, terrifyingly smart piece of electronic warfare hardware. To the untrained eye, it looks like a simple, heavy metal tube, roughly the size of a standard sonobuoy. But inside that pressure-resistant casing, it contains a highly sophisticated, programmable acoustic transmitter, a powerful microprocessor, and a battery pack. When ejected from the submarine's external countermeasures launcher with a burst of high-pressure air, it doesn't just make a loud, generic screeching noise to confuse the enemy torpedoes. That is old, obsolete World War II technology. A modern American ADC actively listens to the surrounding water, analyzes the specific acoustic signature of the submarine that just launched it, and instantly begins broadcasting a perfect synthetic replication of that exact submarine. It mimics the flow noise of the water rushing over the hull. It perfectly copies the specific mechanical frequency of the nuclear coolant pumps. It even simulates the exact magnetic signature of a Virginia-class submarine. It doesn't just make noise. It creates a living, breathing digital ghost in the water. The Texas pushed the ADC out of the launcher. As the small device drifted away into the freezing dark, the American captain ordered a hard rudder adjustment and a rapid, steep depth change. The massive submarine banked sharply, slicing through the water, sliding away from the decoy. But he didn't just sail away to safety to let the situation de-escalate. He initiated a highly complex evasion tactic based entirely on the North Korean submarine's own massive technological limitations. The Romeo class uses an ancient, hull-mounted cylindrical sonar array. It has terrible processing resolution by modern standards. It struggles to separate closely spaced contacts, and its rudimentary analog computers are easily overwhelmed by complex acoustic data. As the American ADC began screaming the Texas's exact acoustic fingerprint into the water, the North Korean sonar operator's screen bloomed with a massive wall of overwhelming contradictory data. The active return from the real submarine was suddenly competing with an identical, slightly louder signature moving in a completely different direction. To the primitive North Korean sensors, it looked as though the American submarine had suddenly split into two, or had dramatically accelerated on a bizarre new heading. The North Korean captain, operating on outdated naval doctrine and completely blinded by his own inferior hardware, took the bait hook, line, and sinker. He ordered his helmsmen to adjust their heading, tracking the decoy. He truly believed he was outmaneuvering an American nuclear submarine. He felt the rush of adrenaline, believing he was winning a tactical engagement against the most powerful navy on the planet. He kept his active sonar pinging away, slamming acoustic energy into the decoy, refining his firing solution on a harmless metal tube that was slowly sinking toward the ocean floor. While the North Korean crew was entirely fixated on the digital ghost ahead of them, the real USS Texas was executing a maneuver that defied the sheer size and weight of the vessel. The Virginia class does not use a traditional bladed propeller. Traditional propellers are inherently flawed because they create cavitation. When large metal blades spin rapidly through the water, the extreme drop in pressure creates tiny bubbles of water vapor on the trailing edges of the blades. When those bubbles collapse back into liquid, a fraction of a second later, they create a sharp, distinct popping noise. A cavitating propeller sounds like a freight train underwater and can be heard by enemy passive sensors from dozens of miles away. Instead of a propeller, the Texas uses a highly classified, heavily guarded piece of technology called a pump jet propulsor. It looks less like a fan and more like a jet engine nozzle mounted on the stern of the boat. It completely shrouds the rotor blades inside a hydrodynamic duct. This design perfectly manages the water flow, practically eliminating cavitation, and allowing the massive submarine to accelerate to high speeds in almost total, ghostly silence. The American captain used that pump jet to execute a flawless, incredibly aggressive tactical maneuver. He drove his 7,000-ton submarine in a wide, sweeping, three-dimensional arc, cutting through the water at 20 knots, aiming directly into the North Korean submarine's baffles. The baffles are the ultimate, terrifying blind spot in all of submarine warfare. Because a submarine's own propulsion system creates turbulent, chaotic, and incredibly noisy water directly behind the boat, the hull-mounted sonar arrays placed at the front of the submarine cannot hear absolutely anything in that conical area at the stern. It is a cone of absolute, total acoustic deafness, trailing behind the vessel. To check the baffles and ensure no one is quietly following them, a submarine has to physically turn its entire hull left or right, a maneuver universally known as clearing the baffles. The North Korean captain, entirely fixated on his firing solution against the American decoy, high on his perceived tactical victory, never bothered to turn his boat. He left his back door wide open. The USS Texas slipped silently into the dead zone directly behind the Romeo class. They were so close now that the American sonar operators didn't even need their hypersensitive equipment to track the enemy. Through the thick steel hull, they could actually hear the crude, unrefined grinding of the North Korean electric motors laboring under the strain. They could hear the clanging of heavy wrenches inside the enemy hull as the overworked mechanics desperately tried to keep the aging systems running. The American submarine was hovering mere hundreds of yards behind the adversary, perfectly positioned, completely undetected, massive, and incredibly lethal. The American captain had the enemy boat completely dead to rights. He had a firing solution dialed into his fire control computers that was so precise, so incredibly close, that the Mark 48 torpedoes wouldn't even need to activate their internal acoustic guidance systems to find the target. They would simply punch straight through the thin, rusted steel hull on pure kinetic momentum alone. But again, the goal wasn't destruction. The goal was to send a message that would resonate all the way back to the highest levels of command in Pyongyang. The American captain picked up the comms handset and gave a single, terrifying order. He told the sonar room to transition their own massive spherical bow array from passive listening mode to active transmission. But he didn't just order a standard sweeping search ping to let them know he was there. That would have been far too gentle. He ordered a focused, maximum power, highly concentrated acoustic blast directed straight into the unshielded stern of the North Korean submarine. The resulting sound wave was devastating. To understand the impact of military-grade active sonar at point-blank range, imagine standing inside a hollow, rusted metal dumpster, while someone outside swings a heavy steel sledgehammer against the metal with the force of a speeding freight train. The concentrated acoustic energy from the American bow array slammed into the thin steel hull of the Romeo class with the force of a massive physical blow. The sheer physical energy of the active sonar blast would have violently rattled the deck plates beneath the North Korean sailors' feet. It would have vibrated the high-pressure air piping, shattered loose glass on the instrument gauges, and violently shaken every man inside that cramped, terrifying metal tube. The noise echoing through the North Korean control room wouldn't have been a simple electronic ping. It would have been a deafening, monstrous, booming roar that instantly shattered the illusion of their ambush. It was a sound so loud, so intensely focused, that it causes actual physical pain to the human ear. In that single, terrifying, ear-splitting second, as the noise ripped through his boat, the North Korean captain realized absolutely everything. The realization crashed down on him with the crushing weight of the deep ocean. He realized that the target he had been proudly tracking and threatening for the last 10 minutes was a fake, a digital toy thrown out to distract him like a laser pointer for a cat. He realized that his carefully chosen thermal layer hadn't hidden him from American sensors at all. He realized that the American submarine hadn't run away in fear when he flooded his torpedo tubes, but had effortlessly, silently slid directly behind him into his blind spot while he wasn't looking. Most terrifying of all, he realized that if the Americans had actually wanted him dead, his hull would have already imploded. He would already be sinking to the bottom of the Sea of Japan in a crush of freezing, violent water. His entire crew dead before they even knew they were under attack. The Americans weren't just better equipped, they were playing a completely different game. On a completely different level of physics and warfare, and they had just effortlessly humiliated him in his own backyard. The blast of sonar was the deep sea equivalent of a highly trained assassin tapping you on the shoulder in a dark alley, putting the cold barrel of a gun to the back of your head, whispering in your ear that you are already dead, and then simply letting you walk away. There was no counterattack. There was no brave final stand for the glory of the regime. The shock, awe, and sheer terror were absolute. The North Korean captain, likely trembling and utterly defeated, immediately ordered his submarine to blow main ballast. The rusted, aging diesel boat frantically pumped high-pressure air into its external ballast tanks, blowing water out of the hull, desperately clawing its way towards the surface to escape the terrifying, invisible predator lingering in its blind spot. It was an act of complete, unconditional tactical surrender. The Romeo class breached the surface of the freezing ocean violently, white water cascading off its rusted black hull, utterly defeated. Its crew was now exposed and vulnerable to the sky, forced to start their noisy diesel engines and limp back to their home port in total, undeniable humiliation, constantly tracked under the watchful, unblinking eyes of American surveillance satellites. If you enjoyed this video, watch this other video on the conflict in the Pacific. Bye for now.